Welcome to Gander Drama Story. Discover the gripping journey of Brenda, a woman who finally sees years of family exploitation when her sister's selfish demands put her to the ring. Brenda chases a bold escape to reclaim her life and freedom.
The unexpected text message popped up on my phone screen just as I was preparing to leave for the office. I am Brenda, a 30-year-old woman who has spent her entire adult life functioning as the ultimate convenience for my demanding family. The incoming notification from my older sister contained no standard greeting before delivering a completely audacious directive. You know, traveling far with kids is really dangerous, so the company is organizing a family retreat this weekend, which means the kids will be left for you to manage. I stood there staring at the bright screen, while realizing this familiar script of shifting responsibility was about to play out exactly like countless times before. Instead of silently accepting my assigned role as the unpaid babysitter so she could enjoy her leisure time, I decided to permanently end this exhausting cycle of being utilized. I typed my response with absolute coldness to ensure I left zero room for any further negotiation or emotional manipulation. That is not my responsibility. Right after hitting send on that definitive statement, I opened a travel website on my computer to book myself a completely isolated, relaxing vacation starting this coming Monday. Exactly 5 minutes after the read receipt appeared on my rejected message, my phone screen began flashing relentlessly with dozens of consecutive incoming calls from my angry parents. Before we dive deep into the chaotic fallout of my refusal, make sure to subscribe to the Gentle Drama Stories channel to never miss a story. Tell me in the comments if you have ever been forced to cut off toxic relatives who constantly demanded your endless personal sacrifices. Ignoring the dozens of missed calls flashing continuously on my screen, I quietly opened my tablet to check the shared family schedule. I deliberately chose to leave my primary device completely silenced because answering would only drag me directly into their familiar emotional manipulation trap. My parents always utilized a highly predictable combination of explosive anger mixed with heavy guilt trips to force my absolute compliance whenever Andrea needed a favor. Refusing to engage with their escalating digital tantrums allowed my mind to remain perfectly clear while I actively sought the real truth behind this sudden weekend arrangement. I knew from years of bitter experience that discovering the actual facts required looking past their chaotic demands. During a brief visit to my apartment late last month, Andrea had hurriedly logged into a shared family email account on my personal tablet to locate a specific discount code. She completely forgot to sign out of the portal after finishing her targeted browsing session that afternoon. Tapping the mail application icon instantly granted me unrestricted access to a continuous stream of her most recent electronic booking confirmations. Scrolling steadily through the highlighted incoming messages quickly unraveled the elaborate web of deceit she had constructed regarding her upcoming weekend obligations. I carefully opened a primary confirmation document, highlighted with a high priority flag sitting right at the top of the inbox. There was absolutely no mandatory corporate retreat organized by her employer, as she had so confidently proclaimed in her demanding text message earlier this morning. The digital receipt clearly detailed an exclusive vacation package specifically designed for couples seeking a romantic luxury getaway. Andrea had officially reserved a premium oceanfront suite at a notoriously expensive resort located directly in the vibrant heart of Miami. The exorbitant total costs displayed at the bottom of the electronic invoice proved she possessed more than enough disposable income to comfortably fund her lavish lifestyle choices. She simply preferred spending her money on personal entertainment while fully expecting me to sacrifice my own well-deserved weekend to provide completely free childcare services. Digging further into the secondary correspondence folders revealed another layer of deception that was significantly more disturbing than a simple luxury hotel reservation. I discovered a finalized digital registration packet for an elite private children's weekend camp located just a few miles outside our city limits. As I thoroughly reviewed the submitted documentation, a massive wave of cold realization washed over me regarding her actual logistical intentions. Andrea had systematically completed the mandatory emergency contact section using my full legal name alongside my private mobile phone number. She even provided my exact residential apartment address as the primary alternate drop location without ever initiating a single conversation to secure my explicit consent. The final follow-up email from the camp logistics coordinator explicitly outlined the exact schedule for the upcoming Saturday morning activities. Andrea had carefully orchestrated a malicious plan to simply drop her children off at my front doorstep at exactly 6 in the morning before the camp buses even began operating. This highly calculated ambush was timed perfectly to ensure she could immediately leave for the regional airport to catch her early morning direct flight to Florida. Her entire selfish scheme relied completely on the arrogant assumption that I would instantly cancel my own personal vacation plans the exact moment those kids arrived at my door. She genuinely believed my deeply ingrained sense of familial obligation would leave me absolutely no choice but to silently manage the massive responsibilities she intentionally abandoned. Reviewing all these official booking documents confirmed that my initial suspicious instincts about her elaborate deception were entirely correct from the very beginning. The sheer audacity required to forge my information onto legal guardianship forms cemented my resolve to never let them utilize me again. I calmly closed the email application with a profound sense of clarity regarding the necessary strict boundaries I needed to enforce next. Early Saturday morning, I sat at my small dining table and directly called the management office of the youth camp, where Andrea had unauthorizedly registered my personal information. I waited through a few cycles of ringing before a cheerful administrative coordinator answered the line with a standard corporate greeting. My voice remained completely steady while I informed the representative that I had absolutely no prior knowledge of this weekend enrollment. I explicitly clarified that I was not the legal guardian for these children and firmly refused to assume any emergency responsibility for the duration of the camp session. The coordinator sounded audibly surprised by my directness, but I did not offer any elaborate excuses for my decision to opt out. I spoke clearly into the phone receiver to ensure there was no lingering confusion regarding my lack of consent. I have never agreed to serve as a legal guardian for these children, so I am requesting that you remove my name from your system immediately. The administrator confirmed that without a valid local emergency contact on file, they would be forced to deny the children admission into the program later that morning. This specific cancellation meant Andrea would be forced to resolve her own logistical crisis mere hours before her scheduled flight to Florida. By removing myself from their deceitful plan, I had effectively dismantled the foundation of her entire secret vacation strategy. I felt a profound sense of relief while realizing that my life was no longer available for their careless exploitation. Immediately after ending the call with the camp center, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from my best friend Cynthia. She was calling to check on my emotional state after seeing a cryptic update I had posted about severing toxic ties earlier that day. I spent the next few minutes explaining the full extent of the deception regarding the Miami resort and the unauthorized use of my residential address. Cynthia listened intently without interrupting, while I detailed exactly how I had neutralized Andrea's plan by speaking with the camp authorities. She was the only person who truly understood the years of quiet resentment that had finally reached a breaking point this weekend. Her supportive presence helped solidify my resolve to remain firm against the inevitable backlash from my parents. Cynthia sighed deeply through the phone line before offering her honest perspective on the situation. "You have finally done the right thing because nobody has the right to turn you into a permanent backup plan for their own life." She reminded me that my sister had spent years assuming my time was hers to manage whenever a romantic opportunity or a social event appeared on her calendar. Hearing her validate my frustration made me feel significantly less guilty about the chaos I was causing for the rest of the family. We discussed the importance of setting permanent boundaries that would prevent any future attempts at this type of blatant disrespect. I felt a renewed sense of strength knowing that I had at least one person who viewed my self-preservation as a necessity rather than an act of selfishness. Once we finished our conversation, I moved quickly around my apartment to pack a small suitcase with the essential items required for my own personal trip. I focused on gathering my passport, a few comfortable outfits, and the electronic confirmation for the mountain cabin I had reserved just yesterday. The realization that I was finally taking control of my own time brought a genuine smile to my face for the first time in weeks. I refused to allow the predictable anger of my parents or the inevitable dramatic texts from my sister to ruin the quiet peace of my morning. My primary goal was to leave the city before the morning sun reached its peak, so I could avoid any physical confrontations at my front door. I checked the locks on my windows and ensured that all my appliances were safely turned off before grabbing my keys. I took one final look around my silent living room while feeling a strange mixture of excitement and lingering apprehension about the coming days. The suitcases sitting by the door represented much more than just a simple weekend getaway from the daily grind of my office job. They symbolized my first real step toward a life where my own needs and desires were no longer secondary to the whims of ungrateful relatives. I felt a powerful sense of determination as I stepped out into the hallway and pulled the heavy door shut behind me. The sound of the lock clicking into place felt like a definitive end to the era of my life, where I was a passive participant in my own exploitation. I walked toward the elevator with a light heart while knowing that my future would be defined by the boundaries I had finally gathered the courage to build. Monday afternoon, as I just returned to work following my short vacation, the professional silence of the office lobby was completely shattered. I was sitting at my desk when the glass front doors swung open with a violent force that made every employee in the reception area look up in confusion. Andrea marched into the building alongside her husband Kevin, while their faces were contorted with a level of pure resentment I had never witnessed before. They did not bother to announce themselves to the receptionist or wait for an invitation to enter the secure workspace. Instead, they charged directly toward my cubicle as if they were prepared to engage in a physical confrontation right in front of my manager. It was immediately obvious that their elaborate plans for the luxury Miami getaway had collapsed into a total disaster. The source of their extreme fury became clear the moment Andrea began shouting across the open floor plan about her ruined weekend. The youth camp administration had followed through on their promise to deny the children admission because there was no authorized guardian available on the premises. They had received the call from the camp director while standing in the middle of the airport check-in line with their suitcases already packed for Florida. Without a place to leave the kids, Andrea and Kevin were forced to watch their flight depart from the gate while they remained stranded in the terminal. Their entire financial investment in the resort deposit and the non-refundable airline tickets had been completely wiped out in a single morning. Andrea stood in the center of the lobby while glaring at me with eyes full of hatred as she attempted to humiliate me in front of my coworkers. She pointed a trembling finger at me while using the loud, dramatic tone she usually reserved for her most manipulative family gatherings. Because of your absolute selfishness, we just lost our entire anniversary vacation, and you are going to be held responsible for every single penny of that lost money. She continued to scream that I had intentionally sabotaged the happiness of her family simply because I was jealous of her romantic lifestyle. Her strategy was clearly to use public pressure and the threat of a professional scandal to force me into a submissive apology. I stood up from my chair and walked slowly toward the center of the lobby while maintaining a fong thigh that remained entirely calm. I caught the eye of the building security officer stationed near the entrance and gave him a subtle hand gesture to signal that he should remain on standby. While my colleagues watched the unfolding drama with wide-eyed curiosity, I refused to react with the same emotional volatility that Andrea was projecting. I stopped a few feet away from my sister and looked directly into her eyes without showing even a hint of intimidation or regret. The silence I maintained for those few seconds seemed to frustrate her even more, as she realized her shouting was not having the desired effect on me. I spoke with a voice that was low, but projected with enough clarity for everyone in the room to hear the truth of the situation. You chose to unauthorizedly fill out legal paperwork with my private information without ever asking for my permission, so this entire failure belongs to you. I explained to the surrounding crowd that her supposed corporate retreat was actually a deceitful cover for a private vacation she expected me to fund with my labor. The mistake of missing her flight was not a result of my actions, but a direct consequence of her own calculated dishonesty and lack of proper planning. I watched the color drain from her face as she realized I was not going to play along with her victim narrative in this professional setting. Kevin attempted to intervene with a mumbled threat about family loyalty, but the firm presence of the security guard moving closer quickly discouraged any further outbursts. The realization that they were now the ones looking foolish in a public space finally forced them to lower their voices. They realized that their attempts to bully me into a financial settlement were failing miserably against my refusal to accept the blame. Without another word of defense, Andrea grabbed her purse and turned toward the exit while her husband followed closely behind her in shamed silence. I watched them walk through the glass doors while feeling a profound sense of pride for finally standing my ground against their toxic expectations. Wednesday evening, I reluctantly drove to my parents' house after receiving a barrage of threatening text messages demanding an emergency family meeting. I parked my car at the curb while feeling a heavy sense of dread regarding the emotional ambush waiting for me behind the front door. The moment I entered the living room, I saw Mom and Dad sitting stiffly on the sofa, while Andrea and Kevin occupied the armchairs opposite them. The atmosphere in the small room was thick with a palpable sense of judgment as all four of them simultaneously directed their accusatory glares toward me. It felt as though I was a criminal standing before a self-appointed tribunal rather than a daughter visiting her family home for dinner. They did not offer a greeting or even a glass of water before starting their coordinated assault on my character. Mom began the evening by delivering her familiar rehearsed speech regarding the sacred moral obligations of family loyalty and personal sacrifice. She argued that because I was currently single without any major domestic responsibilities, helping my sister manage her children was an obvious and mandatory duty. Her voice trembled with a manufactured disappointment while she accused me of becoming cold and disconnected from the people who raised me. She spoke about the importance of being a reliable pillar for the family, even when it required abandoning my own personal comfort or professional boundaries. Every word she uttered was designed to trigger the deep-seated guilt she had spent decades carefully cultivating within my subconscious. I sat silently while watching her perform this predictable theatrical display of maternal concern without feeling the usual urge to apologize. Dad suddenly slammed his hand down on the coffee table with a violent force that made the ceramic coasters rattle against the wood surface. He leaned forward and pointed a thick finger directly at my face, while his voice took on a harsh, commanding tone that left no room for dissent. He demanded that I provide an immediate financial reimbursement for the canceled Miami vacation to demonstrate what he called my sincere goodwill toward healing the family. His logic was that because my refusal to babysit caused the financial loss, I was morally obligated to pay for the anniversary trip they had missed. He claimed that preserving the harmony of the household was worth far more than the petty amount of money he was asking me to surrender. Family is about knowing how to sacrifice for one another. You earn good money, so helping your sister with a trip shouldn't be a problem at all. I listened to his unreasonable demands without flinching or looking away, while the heat of indignation began to rise steadily in my chest. I realized in that moment that their definition of family harmony was simply my total submission to their every selfish whim and desire. Andrea sat beside him with a smug expression of entitlement, as if she truly believed she was a victim who deserved my hard-earned savings. They were not interested in a conversation or a compromise because they only wanted to reestablish the control they had recently lost over my life. The sheer arrogance required to demand thousands of dollars as a penalty for my refusal to be exploited was the final revelation I needed. I understood that as long as I continued to seek their approval, I would never be anything more than a resource for them to deplete. I stood up straight from my chair and looked at each of them individually, while ensuring my voice remained perfectly level and devoid of any shaky emotion. I firmly stated that I would never again play the role of a victim for their endless, unreasonable demands regarding my time or my finances. I picked up my purse from the floor and prepared to leave while the room fell into a shocked, temporary silence following my sudden defiance. Sacrifice only has meaning when it is voluntary, but this cycle of coercion and deceit is called exploitation, and I refuse to participate in it any longer. I watched the confusion on their faces as they realized their traditional methods of bullying were no longer effective against my new sense of self-worth. They had mistaken my previous years of patience for a permanent weakness that they could manipulate forever. Ignoring the sudden erupting shouts of betrayal and the accusations of being an ungrateful child, I walked directly toward the front door without looking back once. The sound of Dad screaming that I was no longer welcome in his house echoed through the hallway while I stepped out into the cool evening air. I realized that this house had long ago ceased to be a genuine family home and had instead become a headquarters for their collective selfishness. Every step I took toward my car felt like I was shedding a heavy layer of obligation that had been suffocating my personal growth for years. I drove away from the neighborhood while feeling a profound sense of clarity about the permanent boundaries I needed to establish next. The bridge was finally burning behind me, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely no desire to put out the flames. Thursday morning, I woke up early to begin executing the relocation plan I had been quietly developing for several months. My decision was not a result of a sudden emotional outburst, but a calculated necessity to preserve my own future and mental well-being. I contacted the Human Resources Department at my firm to officially finalize my request for a transfer to our branch in a different state. Moving to a new office several hundred miles away would provide the absolute isolation I required to escape the toxic influence of my family members. The administrative process was surprisingly efficient because my professional record was spotless, and the company was eager to fill the vacant position in the Dallas office. Securing this professional transition was the primary foundation for my complete disappearance from the lives of those who only saw me as a resource. Cynthia arrived at my apartment complex shortly after sunrise while driving a large rental truck she had secured for my move. She was the only person I trusted with my new destination because she had witnessed the years of manipulation I endured. We began the arduous process of loading my personal belongings and several heavy cardboard boxes into the back of the transport vehicle. Every item I carried out of that apartment felt like a significant weight being lifted off my shoulders as I prepared for a fresh start. Cynthia worked alongside me with an impressive level of efficiency that helped us maintain a steady pace throughout the morning hours. We moved with a sense of urgency because I wanted to ensure I was long gone before any uninvited relatives decided to stage another emotional ambush. We worked in a concentrated silence for several hours while focusing entirely on clearing every corner of the living space before the noon deadline. I was determined to leave no trace of my existence behind, because I wanted my family to find nothing but empty walls if they ever returned. Once the final piece of furniture was securely loaded into the truck, I conducted a thorough final walkthrough of the rooms to ensure nothing was forgotten. I met with the building manager to settle the final paperwork and officially handed over my keys to the apartment. Bidding farewell to that building felt like closing a dark chapter of my life where I was constantly at the beck and call of ungrateful people. There was no sentimentality in my departure, as I only felt a growing sense of exhilaration about the long drive ahead. I spent the next hour systematically disconnecting every utility service associated with my old residential address in Atlanta. I made sure to settle every outstanding balance on my electricity, water, and internet accounts to prevent any future financial complications. Finalizing these payments ensured that there would be no lingering paper trail that my family could potentially use to track my new location. I was meticulous about every detail because I knew how desperate my parents could become once they realized their primary financial support was gone. Severing these logistical ties was a crucial step in ensuring that my transition to a new life would be as seamless as possible. I felt a profound sense of accomplishment as I deleted the utility management apps from my tablet and cleared my browsing history. Before hitting the highway, I stopped at a nearby telecommunications store to purchase a new smartphone with a completely fresh contact number. I chose a service provider that was unaffiliated with my previous family plan to ensure absolute privacy from their constant prying. Once the new device was activated, I removed the old SIM card from my previous phone and threw it directly into a trash bin outside the store. This symbolic act was the final blow to their ability to reach me with their demanding texts and manipulative voicemails. By changing my digital identity, I was effectively building a wall that no amount of familial guilt could ever penetrate again. I sat in my car for a moment while enjoying the silence of a phone that no longer rang with unreasonable demands. Cynthia finished securing the last container in the back of the truck before turning to me with a look of serious concern on her face. "Are you absolutely certain about leaving like this without providing even a single point of contact for them?" I closed the heavy sliding door of the rental truck with a loud, resounding thud that echoed through the quiet parking lot. I nodded firmly while feeling a cold sense of certainty that I had made the only logical choice for my survival. I am absolutely certain because total silence is the only answer they truly deserve after everything they have put me through. We climbed into our respective vehicles while preparing for the long journey toward my new life of independence and peace. That weekend, as I was driving along the highway leaving the city behind, the consequences of a lifetime of dependency began to crash down upon my family. I adjusted the rearview mirror while feeling a strange sense of liberation from the constant emotional noise that had previously defined my existence. Back in Atlanta, the elaborate safety net I had provided for years had finally vanished without leaving any alternative support for Andrea and her husband. Andrea quickly discovered that without my free labor, she was forced to enroll her children in an emergency childcare facility with exorbitant daily rates. This unexpected and massive financial burden began to drain their household budget at an alarming speed while they scrambled to maintain their lifestyle. Their previous arrogance was rapidly being replaced by the cold reality of managing their own logistical responsibilities without my quiet intervention. My parents had spent decades indulging every whim of their oldest daughter while expecting me to act as the primary buffer against her failures. They were now forced to cancel their own weekend plans to travel across town and assist with the chaotic household management at Andrea's house. Mom and Dad spent their Saturday cleaning up messes they usually ignored because they knew I would eventually handle the situation for them. The physical toll of chasing after two energetic children while performing domestic chores began to wear down their resolve by early Sunday morning. They were no longer shielded from the exhausting reality of Andrea's lack of discipline as they directly faced the consequences of their own enabling behavior. The silence of my absence was becoming a deafening roar of practical problems that they were utterly unprepared to solve on their own. The mounting fatigue from actually carrying the weight of familial responsibility caused my parents to begin complaining openly about the situation. The previous facade of a perfect united family began to crumble as Mom and Dad entered into direct conflicts with Kevin regarding his lack of participation. They realized that their son-in-law was just as accustomed to being pampered as their daughter was, which left my elderly parents doing the majority of the heavy lifting. The resentment that had been simmering beneath the surface for years finally erupted into heated arguments in the middle of the cluttered living room. They were no longer shouting at me for being ungrateful, but were instead hurling accusations at one another regarding the sudden collapse of their comfort. The household was rapidly becoming a battleground where everyone was fighting to regain the privilege of being lazy at someone else's expense. When the psychological and physical pressure finally reached an absolute breaking point, Dad decided to drive to my apartment in Atlanta. He intended to physically confront me and use his parental authority to force my immediate return so I could resume my role as the family caretaker. He spent the entire drive rehearsing his speech about my moral failures while fully expecting to find me sitting in my living room. However, when he arrived at the building, he was greeted by nothing but a completely empty apartment with a prominent sign for rent in the window. He reportedly stood in the hallway for several minutes while staring at the locked door in a state of utter disbelief and mounting panic. The realization that I was actually gone meant there was no longer any scapegoat left to blame for the continuing chaos of their daily lives. My family found themselves completely lost as they realized the only person who had consistently managed every crisis in the household had disappeared without a trace. They had spent so long treating my presence as a guaranteed utility that they never considered the possibility of a world where I simply said, no. I checked the voicemail on my old email account one last time while parked at a rest stop along the interstate to see if they had finally understood. I heard the voice of Mom echoing through the speaker while she sounded entirely kiet suk from the demands of her grandchildren. Bo me kiet suk voi bon treroa konjang o jau hai ven hava ku shunhu, mot ngoi truong thanji. Her demand for me to be the adult was particularly ironic considering she was the one currently failing to manage her own family's basic needs. I simply smiled coldly before pressing the button to permanently delete the message and effectively removing their final tether to my life. I muttered a single sentence to myself while watching the digital icon vanish from the screen of my tablet. Now you can all go experience that family responsibility yourselves. I put the car back into gear while feeling a profound sense of satisfaction regarding the chaos I had left behind in Georgia. They would eventually have to learn how to function as independent adults, or they would continue to suffer the consequences of their own entitlement. I was no longer interested in being the architect of their comfort or the silent laborer who held their fragile world together. My journey toward Dallas continued with a heart that was finally light and a future that belonged entirely to me. Monday morning the following week, the warm sunlight of Dallas filtered through the windows of my new apartment while bringing a sense of peace I had never experienced before. I sat at my small kitchen counter with a fresh cup of black coffee and appreciated the absolute silence of a home where no one was waiting to exploit my kindness. Starting my first day at the new branch office felt incredibly refreshing because I no longer spent my working hours in a state of constant anxiety. I did not have to worry about my phone vibrating with unreasonable demands or urgent childcare crises that were never my responsibility to begin with. My professional focus was entirely sharp as I integrated into the new team without the heavy emotional baggage I had carried for years in Atlanta. My personal life was now entirely under my own control, while every hour of my free time belonged exclusively to my own needs and desires. Instead of spending my weekends cleaning up the domestic messes created by Andrea or Kevin, I was free to explore the vibrant neighborhoods of my new city. I realized that the decision to eliminate those toxic relationships was not an act of cruelty, but a necessary movement towards self-preservation. Being related by blood did not grant them a permanent license to drain my resources or sabotage my happiness for their own convenience. I felt a profound sense of empowerment while understanding that my future was no longer a secondary consideration to the whims of ungrateful relatives. The boundaries I had finally established were the foundation of a life defined by mutual respect rather than one-sided exploitation. This story was produced by the Revenge Mode channel to serve as an educational narrative regarding the vital importance of personal boundaries and rational crisis management. We aim to demonstrate through this journey how standing firm against manipulation and using clear logic can effectively dismantle toxic cycles of behavior within a family setting. The actions taken by Brenda were a necessary defense of her own autonomy, while her relatives were left to face the natural consequences of their own entitlement. By removing herself as a convenient resource, she forced her sister and parents to finally experience the weight of the responsibilities they had spent years avoiding. The events of this story offer several sharp lessons regarding self-worth and the dangers of allowing kindness to be utilized as a tool for your own destruction. Genuine kindness must always have clear boundaries, because without them, you simply become a target for selfish individuals who will never be satisfied with your sacrifices. Emotional manipulation within a family thrives on your desire for approval, so choosing your own peace over their guilt trips is the only way to gain true independence. You are never morally obligated to set your own life on fire just to provide warmth for people who refuse to take responsibility for their own choices. I sincerely appreciate every single one of you who stayed through to the very end of Brenda's journey on our channel today. Your time and attention mean a great deal to us while we continue to share these powerful stories of resilience and personal justice. How would you have handled the situation if you found out your sister forged your name on legal guardianship papers without your consent? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe to Revenge Mode for our next upcoming story.
Câu chuyện hư cấu về Brenda là một minh chứng đanh thép cho thấy sức mạnh của việc thiết lập ranh giới cá nhân trước sự bóc lột từ chính người thân ruột thịt. Trong bối cảnh gia đình độc hại, Andrea đã tự ý giả mạo thông tin của Brenda để trục lợi, coi sự tử tế của em gái là một công cụ tiện lợi cho những chuyến nghỉ dưỡng xa hoa. Việc Brenda dứt khoát từ chối và thực hiện kế hoạch tẩu thoát đến Dallas không phải là hành động ích kỷ, mà là sự tự vệ chính đáng trước lối sống ỷ lại của chị gái và sự thao túng mù quáng từ bố mẹ. Bài học cốt lõi ở đây chính là lòng tốt không có ranh giới sẽ là vô tình nuôi dưỡng sự tham lam. Chúng ta không có nghĩa vụ phải gánh vác trách nhiệm mà người khác cố tình vứt bỏ. Hy sinh chỉ có giá trị khi đi kèm sự tôn trọng, thay vì bị coi thường là nghĩa vụ hiển nhiên. Bạn nghĩ sao về hành động quyết liệt của Brenda? Liệu cắt đứt hoàn toàn có phải là giải pháp tối ưu hay vẫn còn cách hòa giải nào khác? Hãy để lại quan điểm cá nhân của bạn ở phần bình luận bên dưới để chúng ta cùng thảo luận nhé.